Manchester City weren't very good at the beginning of the season, but now, with just a few games left, they could potentially finish second and win the FA Cup. So today I'm joined by John Mackenzie and JJ Bull to ask the questions, how did they get good again? And what's Guardiola's plan to get them back to the top? First order of business there, John, is to discuss how they actually got better. Because as we said in the intro, they may well be favourites for second, given the relative ease of their run-in versus Arsenal. We've broken this down into 5 different parts. Where are you starting?
I'm going to start with they got younger. I think if we look at this viz here, which shows you the minutes that Manchester City players have been playing this season, we can see they have a bit of an age problem this season. So what we can see here is age is on the bottom, so the further right you are, the older you are, the higher up you are on the graphic, then the more minutes you've played. We've got this nice lovely peak area in the middle, which is sort of where you want the majority of your players to be, or approaching that, and you don't want too many players beyond that.
So there's not that many in that area,
Well,
John,
there's not many in that area, but there's also a lot of players who have moved beyond that peak. So
they're the ex-peak players.
They're the ex-peak players.
So in there we've got Kyle Walker, Kevin De Bruyne, Gundogan, Edison, Kovacic, Bernardo. I mean, quite a lot of their big players ex-peak.
Yeah, and that's obviously proved to be a problem. Like we talked all season about how they've struggled, particularly in defensive transitions. That's a lot of that is down to just physicality issues, which has been a problem. So I think they've already started to address this by bringing in younger players. So they spent about £180 million in the January window, which is a big chunk of money on 5 players, and we can see some of those players appearing in the minutes here. So
in the neo peak.
In the neo peak, the pre-peak. Also some academy players coming through as well. So Nico O'Reilly, surprised everyone, has become a stalwart now at left back. James McAtee has been played a little bit more as well. So they've got a nice base to go forwards, I think, to move into the future with a squad that actually is maybe a little bit more fit for purpose.
And also worth mentioning Doku, Savinho and Rico Lewis, who are already getting a lot of minutes, still in that neo pre-peak era.
That's right, but I think what's really interesting about this is despite the fact that City brought in a lot of young players, they haven't actually used those for a lot of minutes post the January window. So what I've got here is the playing time that City have had before the transfer window on the left, and then after the transfer window ended on the right. And we can see Omar Mamouche, who is a player who's brought in, peak age player, so it's not surprising that he's got a big chunk of those minutes, but much fewer minutes for Gonzalez and Kujanov and the other youngsters they brought in. They haven't even made it to the top 20 list. What's so interesting then about Manchester City's upturn in form, I think, is that they've done it using players that you didn't expect them to use, right? But we just talked about how they've got an age problem. They've actually used a lot of those older players to solve those problems. So you can see Bernardo Silva, Ruben Diaz, Ilkay Gundogan, Kevin De Bruyne has got more minutes as well. They've used Mateo Kovacic a lot as well. So
you can teach an old dog new tricks.
You can, and I think that's
Did you hear that, JJ? Good news for you, isn't it?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, good news for JJ. But also the important thing here is that the rebuild hasn't made it onto the pitch yet. Actually, what's happened here is that Pep Guardiola has solved problems in a tactical way.
Oh, okay. I mean, how did he do that, JJ, with the old players?
Well, he's changed a lot of the way that Man City play. And a lot of it can be seen in the shape. And I can show you in some screenshots. Here is Manchester City playing from left to the right. And what you'll observe here is that the width comes from 2 wingers. This is very normal for a Guardiola team. The width comes from wingers. He's always done that. You have players in the middle of the pitch, but they are the wingers hugging the touchline, as you've probably seen forever in all his different teams. But you also have 3 centre-backs, which is very normal now, and they have 3 centre-backs here. And then what you also have is 1 midfielder, because Rodri can do all of this himself. Whether the interiors, the floating 8s are higher up the pitch, near to the striker, that's what you've got. But if we cut to the future, or our past now, what you have is a screenshot from a game against Aston Villa, who you may have heard of. Yes. Here is Manchester City, and what we have now, if you observe, is the width coming from fullbacks, not wingers. What you'll also see is there's only 2 centre-backs, not 3, and you'll also see that there are 4 midfielders, not 1.
This seems very ordinary.
Yeah, well, this is a lot of midfielders. There's also actually probably 6, because these 2 are, well, they have Mamouche and James McAtee, who's very much a midfielder, playing further up, because he's changed it to be more of like a 4-2-2-2 or 4-4-2, whatever you want to call it. And there's probably, I think there's a few reasons for it. John's discussed some of them. I think that they lack with a lot of mobility. And so what you want to do if you have lots of midfielders altogether, it means that you can play shorter passes, which means that you're less likely to lose the ball. But also if you do lose the ball, you're easier to jump on it and stop transition. So it's about protecting yourself, making yourself a bit more stable, and being able to make sure that you can pass the ball around and move the opponent the way you want by combining them with players. So you're kind of beating opponents with passing rather than trying to take it past them with physicality. And that's kind of what Guardiola's been left with this season. Lots of players who can't really run that much, but he can pass a bit. So that's kind of what he's done. And these fullbacks moving out wide has made a big difference.
Okay, great. John, what's number 3 then?
I'm going to follow on from what JJ's saying, because JJ's essentially saying that Guardiola's looking for stability, right? They've been all over the place a little bit defensively. They've sorted that out, but it means that the roles that the players have on the pitch have changed. So I've got a quote here from after that Aston Villa game that JJ just showed, where Pep says, "For 9 years, I've always played with wingers high and wide, but lately, for different reasons, for stability, maybe we need more control or whatever, we play with fullbacks wide." So because he's going for that stability with overloads in the centre, with narrower forwards, it has then changed the way that his team are going to approach width.
I love the way you say "or whatever."
Or whatever. Well, let's just talk about what difference it makes to have width provided by fullbacks rather than wingers. Now, we know that Guardiola likes to use wide wingers in the past because it creates space in your back line, right? So you have your two touchline hugging wingers, you pull the opposition fullbacks out, it creates lots of spaces in between the lines. Your centre forward, who's one of the best in the world, is going to occupy both centre backs, and it creates space in between the lines of the back four for you to attack. It's quite a nice way of generating space. Now, often the way that you access these wingers, though, is because you've got an inverted fullback, is that you're playing the ball from one of the outside centre backs in possession into the feet of a winger, who's then going to receive it fairly statically, and they're going to be in a, generally speaking, isolated 1v1 against a fullback. You're going to try and get your interiors, or your eights running inside into here and dragging players with them. And the problem is that what ends up often happening is that the opposition have time to get back into their box, and they sort of fashion a low block. If Doku does get around his opponent, which he often does, because the centre midfielders for the opposition dropping in with your own centre midfielders, you just have packed boxes, and often it's quite difficult to generate chances from there. So now Pep Guardiola wants to overload the centre. He's not having his wingers hugging the touchline. So here's a screenshot from that Villa game again. You can see both of the wingers here are now much narrower, and they're dragging their fullbacks with them. That's making that back line much more compact. It's reducing the amount of space between the lines. And interestingly here, like, they're not even using a striker. City, you can see the two centre backs for Villa are sort of having to question whether or not they should jump forward onto these two midfielders or stay in their position. But what this does is it then creates space for the fullbacks to arrive in. And I think this changes completely the way that you occupy those wide areas, because now what you can actually do is you can have these fullbacks arriving dynamically into space. So they arrive with the ball at their feet, with the ball moving, able to run in and attack the space in behind. So I've got an example of this happening from the Bournemouth game in the FA Cup. This was the first time they used Nico O'Reilly really in this run as a fullback, and we can see everything that we've talked about here, right? So everyone's narrow for City. They've got all of their midfielders inside, their wide forwards are narrow. They've dragged Bournemouth across onto this side. It's opened up a huge amount of space for Nico O'Reilly to run into.
They're all stood in the shade, John.
They are it doesn't make it very easy to see.
They know how to deal with English summers.
That's right. What ends up happening here is that City are actually able to switch the play quite quickly. The ball arrives at Nico O'Reilly's feet with speed. You can see the narrowness of the opposition back line. He can carry the ball forward and then play the ball into the back post to Erling Haaland here, who ends up scoring. And so even that simple switch, I think, of using your wingers quite narrow and then having your fullbacks arrive means that you can actually occupy that width in a very, very different way. And I think that it's actually created a few goals for them. Nico O'Reilly scored a few as well. So what this means is that by occupying width in a very different way, they're actually able to generate completely different tactical advantages. And this is, I think, in part why they've been quite good in this recent run.
Cool, that's 3. Okay, JJ, 4.
Well, it's not all about tactics, Joe. Sometimes it's about attitude, mentality, and work rate. All the important ingredients for a fine juice. And Ilkay Gundogan has talked about this recently. He says also strawberries make a good juice. I can tell you exactly what he said. Not in his voice, though. I feel like in a lot of games from our side, maybe we gave sometimes a bit too much importance to tactics. Interesting for a Guardiola player to say that. And didn't really pay attention much on our behaviour. Behaviours of ourselves. Having that determination, that desire, aggressivity. That's what he said. Like simple things that are part of the game. but maybe sometimes you just think too much about positioning yourself or whatever.
Why do they keep saying, oh, whatever, Man City?
If you say something too serious, you have to be like, oh, whatever.
Whatever.
And I can show you an example of attitude and behaviours not consistent with what we'd expect from a Man City team from
please.
a Man City game against Manchester United. So what you see here is something you don't normally see ever in a Man City game, is players not knowing what to do. Specifically, these two chaps here. They're both going, you should be doing this. No, you should be doing this. But actually, I think there's another player who should be doing something else as well. When I say doing this, what they mean is who's going to close down the player on the ball. So City have always been really good, all Guardiola's teams are very good, at pressing, winning the ball back, knowing exactly where and when to be, because if one part of your press falls apart, you're in trouble, you can get cut through. So what you have here are the two players going, well, you should be doing it. So I actually think Bernardo Silva might be the one who should probably jump here because of what other players are. I won't go through it, it'll take forever. But you're basically one player for each player is what you're looking at here. Haaland's shouting at someone has to go and press, because if you don't, there's no pressure on the ball, which means they can play a ball over the top. When we play a high line, that becomes dangerous. But Bernardo Silva doesn't make the run. Phil Foden should probably come across and cut the pass out. You want to make a curved run and cut out either the left or right of where this ball is to try and stop one particular pass to help everyone else go. And then Haaland could also come across as well. All three of these could be doing that. And you see Ruben Dias on the left here is shouting, someone's got to go and pressure that. But they don't do it. This is the 89th minute, so maybe they're a bit tired, but still, Guardiola teams don't really do this normally. And this is when they are starting to not have a good run. So because there's no pressure on the ball, Martinez has the ball. He can then pick his pass. No one gets him fast enough. Xerxes makes a run to take Diaz out of the game. But quietly, sneakily in the background, what you've got is Amad Diallo, who is making a run from out to in versus Matheus Nunes, who is not a left back. So I don't think you can't really excuse letting him go, but it's not his natural thing to do. I think he thinks someone will pick him up. Guardiola's flat-footed here, everyone else is going. That's not good because he should be able to see his partners running back. He should be on his toes as well, not playing off sideline properly. So then the ball comes over the top. Diallo beats him making that run. It's more curved, but I can't figure out how to do curves on that particular piece of software. And so he gets in behind it. That's Nunes not tracking him. He gets in behind. There's a gap between two centre-backs who haven't read it, no communication, another thing you normally associate with Guardiola teams. And the goalie comes out. And Amad finishes into an empty net after rounding him. But that's the attitude, behaviours that we don't want to see of Man City players. We know they fixed it, because as you can see here, voila, another piece of viz. And you can observe on the right-hand side, their pressing intensity has trended back over time to being more like what we think. It definitely dropped off. Roundabout, I think this correlates to when they had that bad run of games, they lost 5 in a row and they drew 1 in Europe. And this is what happened, and they come back to it. So now they are doing the things they're supposed to do again. They're more organised, controlled, stable.
It is really interesting though, because I think we always like to sort of silo off tactics and then behaviour and attitude. But I think what JJ showed really well there is that tactics rely on you having to have the right attitude, right? I remember Arne Slot at the beginning of the season where he was like, there's no point talking about tactics if your players aren't going to win duels, right? We've just seen a really good example of the players not dropping their back line properly, which they should, it's the basics, right? Every team in the Premier League knows what they should do in that situation, and they would just do it in their sleep usually. And City, over the last 8 years when Guardiola's been here, they've been so good at doing all of the basics correctly.
Yeah.
They're not doing that, and as a result, it doesn't matter how good your tactics are, everything falls to pieces. So you have to have those little tiny, like, seemingly insignificant things right, as well as the big overview picture stuff right as well.
It is a good point. We break things into categories to discuss them often, but footballers have a much more holistic approach to learning how to play, don't they? Well, the fifth and final point on our list here is actually provided by Sam Lee, the Manchester City correspondent here at The Athletic. And Sam Lee was keen to point out that the Marmoush and the gang, the new players that arrived during the January transfer window, have now had a significant bedding in period of at least 6 months. They'll have a pre-season as well. So by the time the new season comes around, looking forwards, of course, things should be pretty good.
Marmoush and the gang will be having a rare old time.
Well, speaking of rare, here's Phil Hay with a story about some meat.
Thursday's Europa League semi-final against Tottenham Hotspur was the biggest game that Bodo Glimt have ever hosted. They made history by becoming the first Norwegian team to reach the last 4 of the competition. There was a slight problem though. The stadium has a capacity of 8,200 and only 450 tickets went on general sale. 50,000 people applied. That's basically the entire population of the town. So fans got creative in making sure they got their hands on one. One supporter offered up reindeer meat in exchange for a seat. Another acquired one by trading boknefisk, a seafood delicacy that's described as the Rolls-Royce of fish. It sells at about $50 a kilo. All I'm saying is, I hope it was worth it. Sign up to the Athletic FC newsletter for all the best and biggest stories from the world of football. You can join for free by clicking on the link below.
Hey, thanks, Phil. Oh, one more thing, by the way. You can vote for your signing of the season in the Athletic FC Podcast's End of Season Awards. Scan the QR code on the screen now in order to do that. Okay, well, that's how they went from bad to good this season, John. But what about in the summer upcoming? What do they need to do to turn themselves into a great team?
Well, we've just talked about how they've got a changing attitude to width and how you provide it and how you exploit it.
I've got a changing attitude to width, every Christmas.
Yes, Joe. Well, City are using fullbacks for width now, and they haven't really been doing that in the past, so their squad isn't really built to have fullbacks who are providing width. They're using, as we've said, Nico O'Reilly, who was being used as a midfielder earlier in the season. They're using him as a fullback. They've also got Matheus Nunes on the other side, who sort of slowly drifted there after Pep said that he's suitable for playing in the middle. Raises the question whether or not in the window they're going to actually address that as a squad profile issue and bring in a fullback. And so I'm kind of interested to see what happens there, particularly because a lot of the left backs that people have been talking about in response to these sorts of questions of what City might do are sort of more traditional profiles, right? Because we've talked about, you're offering them width in the wide areas to just run into. So players like Milos Kerkez, Anthony Robinson being talked about, suggesting that what they're looking for is just a straight up traditional fullback who can make overlapping runs, cross into the box, etc. But I do think it's worth noting that Pep always wants flexibility in players. He always wants players' profiles that can do lots of different things. Even within this system, we've seen the fullbacks having to do things that a traditional fullback might not be asked to do. So back to the Aston Villa game that we talked about before. In this game, Doku comes on late on. Doku is obviously a wide player. They're using those wide players inside, but at this moment in time, Pep clearly doesn't think that Doku can offer the same kind of upside inside, so he's just used him on the outside. And as a result, Nico O'Reilly is then having to move in to cover that space so that Gundogan can push forward into the area where you might expect Doku to be. You can see the same thing happening in the Wolves game as well, more recently. And what's happening is O'Reilly's having to fill in the channel where the wide forward isn't. So the wide forward is wide, so he's come inside. If the wide forward's inside, he'll go on the outside. So it does suggest that the profile of fullback that they'll need will need to have the flexibility to be able to do those things. Now, in the summer, City were very strongly linked with Andrea Cambiasso, who is a player who has those sort of flexibilities. A Juventus player, has been playing as a wing back for them a lot this season, but can also come inside as well. So it'll be interesting to see if they reignite any interest in him. But I think these are the sorts of transfers that I think will be really interesting to give us a sense of how Pep is going to think about width and providing width in the future.
Okay. JJ, John's talked about players that might come in there. Players that are leaving, Kevin De Bruyne in particular, I mean, how do you account for that? Because he's been absolutely crucial to Manchester City's success over the last few years.
Well, yes, he's been very good. I would say one of the best in history, in the Premier League anyway, definitely. And also he's probably Guardiola's best player. He's been the difference maker for a long time. And replacing that is very, very difficult. For example, since Guardiola has been in charge at Man City, no other player in the Premier League has created more chances or provided more assists than Kevin De Bruyne. More than everyone in the league. That's quite a lot of assists and chances to replicate. But he also does it from all over the pitch, as you can also see here. Well, look at all the different blue bits, which is where he mostly is. You see, he's all over the pitch. So what you need is someone who can do these things, create all these chances, do all the things that De Bruyne does, in that way. But it's not just that De Bruyne creates chances like he does all the time. He also does things like, if you put him in the team, we'll chuck Bernardo Silva out here. So he'll often receive the ball in these deep positions and then drive it all the way up, especially in counter-attack moments that creates huge chances and goals. He also has this, what I will call the De Bruyne zone, which I think is round about here, where he curls these lovely passes to the back post and front post to set up chances.
The David Beckham zone.
David Beckham zone, I think, is actually more here.
They're sort of overlapping a little bit, aren't they?
I think so. David Beckham also may be here too.
Yeah.
But I think that's fair. The De Bruyne zone, he is what I call a difference maker. And a way you can kind of judge who is a difference maker and who isn't is by looking at underlying numbers versus actual ones. And De Bruyne consistently scores over his expected goals. This is if you take away penalties out of it, he's always scored over his expected goals. Also assists, same thing. Just creates stuff out of nothing. Now, I'm trying to come up with alternative names for difference maker so it works better as an actual role.
To build a new brand around
I've got Unicorn, Goal Head, World Wonder, Match Winner, XG Breaker, Love Maker, Soul Shaker.
Goal Head.
Yes. Why this is so important to have a goal head in your team. So the way Guardiola teams play, when they get to the final third, it's normally very controlled and maybe slow. So like what John's talking about, it's about control and having players set positions. You have a certain amount of width to have other players in the positions to try and break down that low block. But what you need is someone who can open up the tempo, who can speed it up, who can find something out of somewhere to break that down. If you don't have a player like that, oftentimes nothing happens at all. And so what they need is to have an elite goal head come in.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably going to be someone like the sort of players I've listed here: Bellingham, Fernandes, Musiala, Palmer. They're not going to get those. Phil Foden maybe this could be his time to star in the role.
Could be.
He's been auditioning for a long time. Will it be now? Other potential options: Arda Güler, I think would do well. Morgan Rogers offers something. Gibbs White, Maddison, Eze, Doué. Sorts of players you could potentially bring in. But I think there was one player that stands out above all others that they need to bring. There's one player Man City must bring in.
Chris Wood?
This summer. It's not Chris Wood.
Oh.
It's another player that does the things that De Bruyne does. Always scores over his expected goals. He's creating goals out of nothing. He assists when you shouldn't be able to assist.
Who is it?
It's Florian Wirtz. Wherever he costs to bring in, they should be doing that if they can get him in. He would change everything and can open up games. He would make them a title challenger straight away again. I think he's unbelievably good.
Also has a fantastic name that I like to say, Florian Wirtz.
That's one of the best things about him.
Yeah.
There's another player, though, I think would also make an excellent signing for them, and he's been linked in a lot of our athletic writing, especially by Sam Lee. So Morgan Gibbs White, starting for Nottingham Forest this season, there's a lot of similarities between him and De Bruyne. You might not see it because he plays for Forest in a very different way of playing, but you can see he's all over the pitch. He's doing the same sort of coverage of the pitch that De Bruyne does, but he does things that no other players really can do. So you might remember him playing against City in the FA Cup semi-final. Here's him just popping up in attack, playing wide, so he can play all different positions. He drops back to hit this first-time volley. It's a like stunning technique. He's so unlucky he doesn't go in. That's the kind of thing that only really good players do. Not every player does these sorts of things. Here he is against Sheffield United in the Premier League, driving the ball forward, like really carrying them up the pitch, just like De Bruyne. He's got like the power, the acceleration, the speed just to get past people with close control and balance, to be able to go past them like this. And then when he gets to the De Bruyne zone, he's able to cross it into the back post for someone to get a chance. And Wood doesn't finish here, but he easily could have. And so what you have here is Gibbs White, again, turning up on the left. He's all over the pitch in attack, combining with everything. And this is an example of, I think, a move you see a lot of times with Guardiola teams, where they have all players together and they do a give and go 1-2. One passes inside, then runs in behind. Gibbs White, first touch is immaculate, takes it, doesn't kill it dead, moves it to the side to bring players towards him, so he can then move the ball where he wants next. Players start to close him down, they get close enough to him, he sees the running behind and he scoops it over the top to set up a chance there. I think Gibbs White could genuinely be a top tier player for Man City and could be an adequate replacement for De Bruyne. No one will replace De Bruyne, but he can do a lot of things that he does. And one other thing, if they can get both, if they could get both, Wirtz tends to play on the left-hand side of a midfield, in the half space, and Gibbs White tends to be in the right. It's almost too perfect.
That would be scary with Haaland in the middle.
Yes, well, absolutely. I mean, with anyone in the middle with those two, it would be scary.
Okay, thanks, JJ. Now, John, JJ's talked about some new players there. We'll do that more in the future with our summer series of sensible transfers coming up. But, John, there are some interesting aspects of this rebuild that centre around players already at the team. I'm thinking specifically of Savinho and Doku, and your reference to fullbacks earlier. What does that mean for wingers?
Well, Doku and Savinho were brought in to be the new Manchester City wingers who are going to do the things that Pep wants wingers to do. And now all of a sudden we're saying, well, wingers are being used inside, they're being used in a very different way. Width is being provided through the fullbacks. So the big question is, what does that mean for players like Doku and Savinho? Now, I think with Savinho, it's maybe a slightly different story than it is for Doku, because if we look here, this is the semi-final game for City against Forest. You can see Savinho is just being used a lot more narrowly, so he's technically the wide forward here, but he's happy to come inside and engage in the middle here. You've got the fullbacks here offering the width, as we've seen. With Doku, it's slightly different because, as we saw before, Doku has been being used as a standard winger when he's come on, so they're bringing him in late in games and seeing if he can create something from those wide areas. But an interesting quote from Guardiola here saying, Doku is not playing as a winger lately because I'm open with the fullbacks, which I guess he means his fullbacks are more open and he's using width for the fullbacks. Doesn't say whatever here though,
or whatever,
so that's fine. That's the reason why. And the moment he learns to play inside, which he will, because I think he has the quality to do it, he will play inside. So it does suggest that he thinks that Doku can be used as a more central player here as well. But I think it's worth saying that with Pep Guardiola, you've always got to keep your mind open about what's going to happen in the future, because he changes things all the time. Like we're talking about 7 or 8 games where they've been playing in this way, and even during that period, he sort of tweaked things with the structure. next season, as we said, Rodri back, Haaland back, does that mean they just go back to the way that they were playing before, with maybe new players brought in as well? It's hard to know, but in the current system, it seems as though the general idea is to have those wingers playing more narrowly. Unless Doku can do that, then it does raise questions about how he's going to fit in.
Well, JJ, John just asked a really key question there. Rodri's coming back. Does this change what we're thinking about the midfield complexion? Does it mean that they go back to playing how they played before?
Well, I think when Rodri comes back, the thing is, he's so good that you can kind of play differently with him. Certain players let you do this. I suspect what will happen is we'll see a return to the single pivot that Guardiola has always used throughout his career. We have that in, and then you have other players that can come inside to join him, because Rodri can do the work of about 3 players basically. So when you can push other players forward to attack in this way, and Rodri can cover the distances behind them, which is really useful. But the thing is, like, they've been playing this 4-2-2-2 system, which they've done in the past, and Rodri has played alongside people, so you could bring Bernardo Silva or someone like that in next to him. But when you do that, it means you've got Haaland next to someone else. What do you do with Marmoush? Where does the width come from if you're playing these? Because Haaland's not going to go out wide to do that. Marmoush maybe could, but it changes how you play, because Haaland is not the kind of player you really want dropping in to midfield to play with this. So what you'll probably see actually is a bit of all of this in every single game, and then Guardiola will probably switch between systems between their opponents. So you'll get some games where you have wide wingers who will try and stretch the width this way. You'll have some games where you don't have Haaland playing at all. You'll have some games where he's asked to drop in a little bit more next to another forward, so you retain that sort of 4-2-2-2 system. But I think the benefit they'll have next season is that all these players will know all these different roles and positions and can switch seamlessly in between them from game to game and even moment to moment within a game.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, also, thinking about the system changing a lot and Guardiola being open-minded, it does feel as though next season there might be a short list of players not really assured of their place in the team. I was going to ask you both this, but JJ, what do you think?
Well, he'll bring in some new players. That'll definitely happen, which means you could probably get rid of some because you don't want too big a squad. The easiest way to look at it would be looking at when their contracts expire, and there's quite a few players whose contracts will run out next summer, which is 2026, I believe. Mm-hmm. Yes, so that's good. So some of them are players like Ederson, who Sam Lee's talked about in some Athletic articles, might be on his way to somewhere in the summer, so they replace him with some other goalkeeper. That gets lots of wages off your budget as well. It's quite useful. John Stones, often injured. So one of the things that Guardiola needs to have is reliable players in that they are available for selection. And too many players at City, especially this season, last couple of seasons, are injured too often. So he does like to rotate players, but if you have players like, especially Mackenzie, Stones, who are almost always seem to be injured for a spell of months in the season, it's not great for consistency and just going forward. So you might see, especially John Stones, go. Players like James McAtee, breaking into the first team now, could easily keep him and wouldn't be too much to do that, but he has 1 year left. It might make sense to sell him to someone where he can play all the time, have a better career with someone where he can actually play all the time, and then you help yourself with your PSR regulations so you can buy more players in the summer, all the fancy ones like Wirtz and Gibbs-White. So I think that's probably what we'll see, is players like that will end up going, so that you've got a bit of money coming in. But I'd also say someone like Jack Grealish is quite interesting, because does he play inside, outside? What does he even do now? Is he going to fit into what Guardiola wants to do next?
What do you think about Jack Grealish, John?
Grealish is interesting because Grealish, we've talked about those wingers who maybe don't suit the system as well on paper. I think Grealish is one of those players who can play more centrally and has done in the past.
He can do both.
He can do both, yeah. I guess the big question with Grealish is whether or not his time at City is maybe drawing to a close. Obviously, he was a marquee signing, a £100 million player back in the past. And although he's had some seasons where it's worked out quite nicely, it does seem as though things have been on the decline for a little while now. So it might just be in everyone's best interest for him to move on, find somewhere else to go. But yeah, it's certainly interesting to see whether or not the next few weeks, if he can break into the new team with the new structure, whether or not he can find a space for himself in that team.
I'll be curious to find out, John. Okay, so look, to summarise, I'm going to ask you both now, what's the single most important thing Pep Guardiola needs to do with this Manchester City rebuild? To give you a moment to think about it, I'm going to tell the audience what Sam Lee has suggested that is the case. So we have 3 things here from Sam Lee. The first is to replace Ederson. We've already mentioned that. To have a clear plan for life after Kevin De Bruyne, which has already also come up in the show. The one thing that hasn't come up in the show so far is to sort out their homegrown issue. I don't know if either of you knew this, but they only had 6 homegrown players this season and a squad size of 23. If they drop any more, their squad will become even smaller, and presumably that's not a good thing for Guardiola.
No, and it's interesting that they've been linked with Morgan Gibbs-White so much in the last few weeks, because he is obviously a homegrown player. So again, that would not only give you a really great player in the homegrown player slot, but you would be able to bring in a non-homegrown player as well.
Okay. JJ, most important thing?
They need to sign a goal head,
Yeah.
a difference maker, so that they can still control games the way they do, but also open them up all of a sudden. They've missing goals since Mahrez went. I think that's a big loss.
Fair enough, goal head. John?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be boring and echo the sentiment, because I think what we've seen the last few months consist of for Guardiola is actually fixing problems from a tactical point of view. He's got them to a really nice base level, but it still feels as though they're missing that extra level on top, which takes you from being like a very solid team to being a team that's unbeatable. And it feels as though that's what's happened recently. They've dropped off from a sort of really elite level in terms of the performers they have, and they're just sort of making everything work with the players that they've got right now. So if they bring in someone really exciting, such as a Florian Wirtz, yeah, then I think that will do it for them.
I'm so proud of you, John. I thought he was going to say something boring about out of possession, but he said they need goals.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Amy Lawrence and James Horncastle. With the latest transfer news and insights on every Premier League story that matters, theathletic.com puts you inside football, and you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.